Oh, spare us the Sunday school sermon, Karoline. This is a press room, not a pulpit. Keep your imaginary friend out of politics. That's Ethan Caldwell, a liberal reporter, unloading on Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, in the middle of a briefing. What happens next? No one sees it coming, and it's going to pull you in deep. Karoline Leavitt's at the podium, talking about a national crisis that's got everyone on edge. She's laying out the plan when she says, "In times like these, we're reminded of a strength beyond ourselves. God's grace has carried this nation through worse, and it'll carry us now." That's when Ethan cuts her off with that line, "Oh, spare us the Sunday school sermon, Karoline. This is a press room, not a pulpit. Keep your imaginary friend out of politics." He keeps going, voice sharp and biting. "What's next, press secretary? You going to tell us God's faxing you policy memos? Leave the fairy tales to the kids. This is the United States, not a theocracy." The room goes quiet. Ethan's smirking, expecting her to stumble. He's sure he's got her cornered. But then, clap, clap, clap. It's Jack Hensley, an old journalist who's seen it all. He says, "Let her finish." 3 words, slow and firm. Ethan's thrown off, and everyone's attention shifts to Karoline. She steps up and looks right at Ethan. Her voice is calm, cutting. "Ethan, you're free to mock what I believe, what millions believe, because of the very system you're standing in. A system built by people who weren't ashamed to say, 'In God we trust.' I'm not here to force faith on you. I'm here to remind you, dismissing it doesn't make you smarter, it makes you smaller." Ethan shifts, but she's not finished. "If my God's just a fairy tale, why's it scare you so much? You asked for reality. Here it is. We're all searching for something bigger than ourselves. I've found mine. What's yours?" She stops, adjusts her notes, and moves on with the briefing. Ethan's got nothing. No comeback, no jab. He's silent. The other reporters don't speak. Some scribble, some just listen. Jack Hensley nods once and stays quiet. Later that day, Ethan's in the press lounge, alone with his thoughts. He's replaying her words. "What's yours?" And they're digging into him. He mutters to himself, "She's got guts, I'll give her that." But it's more than that. He's unsettled. He thought he'd crushed her, but she stood there, steady as a rock, and turned it back on him. He's not used to that. He sits there, staring at the wall, wondering why it's bothering him so much. He's always been the guy with the quick jab, the one who walks away laughing. Not this time. Then Jack Hensley walks up and sits down. He says, "You pushed her hard today." Ethan shrugs, brushing it off. "Just doing my job, Jack. She shouldn't bring that stuff in here." Jack leans in and says, "Maybe. But I've seen plenty crack under less. She didn't. Why'd you go at her like that?" Ethan snaps, "Because it's nonsense. God this, grace that. It's a crutch, and I'm not here to play along." Jack doesn't react. He says, "Fair enough, but you didn't answer her. What's yours, Ethan? What keeps you going?" Ethan freezes. He doesn't have an answer. Not one he'll admit. Jack keeps talking. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. Cancer. Every day I'd sit by her bed and she'd say, 'God's got this.' I didn't believe it then. Still don't know if I do. But she did. And it kept her strong till the end. Karoline's got that same steel. You don't have to buy it, but you can't say it's not real for her." Ethan's quiet. Jack's words stir something, a memory of his mom praying over him when he was sick as a kid. He'd been maybe 6, burning up with fever, and she'd knelt by his bed, whispering words he didn't understand. He pushes it down and says, "That's her deal, not mine." Jack nods and says, "Maybe, but you're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Then he adds, "I didn't get it either back then. My wife, she'd smile through the pain, tell me it wasn't the end. I'd argue with her, say it was all just wishful thinking. She'd just look at me and say, 'You'll see one day, Jack.' I'm still waiting. But Karoline? She's not waiting. She's living it." Ethan doesn't respond. Jack says, "You don't have to say anything. Just don't kid yourself that you've got it all figured out." Then he gets up and leaves. Ethan's alone now, and that question, "What's yours?" is stuck in his head. He's spent years knocking down what others hold on to, but what's he got? His job? His cynicism? It's not enough, and he feels it. He mutters, "She didn't even blink," and there's a shake in his voice he doesn't catch. He sits there, replaying the whole thing, her standing there, unflinching, while he threw everything he had. He'd wanted to break her, to prove something. But she didn't break. She didn't even bend. He starts thinking about his mom again. That memory keeps creeping back, her voice, soft and steady, telling him it'd be okay. He'd laughed it off even as a kid, told her he didn't need prayers. She'd just smiled and kept going. Now Karoline's words are mixing with that, and it's messing with him. He says to himself, "It's just words. Doesn't mean anything." But it does, and he knows it. The next day, Ethan's back at the briefing. Karoline's up there, talking policy like nothing happened. He doesn't ask anything, just watches. She finishes, and as she's leaving, their eyes meet for a second. She doesn't gloat, just nods, like she knows he's still wrestling. He looks away, but he's thinking, she's not scared of me. She's not scared of anything. It's not anger in his voice anymore. It's something else, something he can't name. Weeks go by, and Ethan's not the same. He's quieter, less sharp. He's still doing his job, still asking questions, but the edge is gone. One night, he's at home, digging through an old box from his mom's place. He finds a note she wrote him, "You're enough, Ethan. God sees you." He stares at it, and his throat tightens. He doesn't pray, doesn't break down, just sits there, holding it. Karoline's words come back, "What's yours?" And this time he doesn't fight them. He starts talking to himself low and unsteady. "What's mine? What's mine? I don't know. I don't know." He's always had an answer for everything, every question, every argument. But not this. He thinks about Jack's wife, about his mom, about Karoline. They all had something solid. He's got nothing like that. He says, "I thought I was smarter than that. I thought I didn't need it." But now he's not sure. A few days later, he's at the press lounge again, and Jack's there. Ethan says, "You ever figure it out? What your wife meant?" Jack says, "Not yet, but I stopped fighting it. That's something." Ethan nods and says, "Karoline. She didn't back down. I threw everything at her and she didn't back down." Jack says, "That's what faith does. Doesn't mean it's true for you. Just means it's true for her." Ethan says, "I don't get it. I don't get how she can stand there and say that." Jack says, "You don't have to, but you felt it, didn't you?" Ethan doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. He felt it. The weight of her words, the way they cut through his armor. He'd mocked her to feel big, but she'd shown him something he couldn't touch. He says, "Maybe I was wrong about her." Jack says, "Maybe. Or maybe you're just starting to ask the right questions." Ethan keeps that note from his mom on his desk now. He doesn't read it every day, but it's there. He's not praying, not believing, not yet, maybe not ever, but he's not laughing it off anymore either. Karoline's question, "What's yours?" is still with him, and it's not going away. He says to himself one night, she didn't need to win, she just needed to stand there, and that's what gets him. She stood there, and he couldn't knock her down. She didn't just win that day, she reached into him, past the mockery, and left something he can't shake. It's not about him believing what she does. It's about him facing what he doesn't. That's the story, folks. A clash that started with venom and ended with a quiet that cuts deeper than words. What do you think? Did Karoline get through? Will Ethan ever figure it out? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around for more stories that'll keep you locked in. See you next time. See.